On the morning Emily Carter was admitted to the hospital, her husband left a note on the kitchen table that was shorter than a goodbye. The most frightening thing was not that Ryan had left, but that Emily looked at that note and realized she was no longer surprised enough to feel the pain right away. The old bus of Briarwood trembled as its wheels ground over the road, glazed with a thin layer of ice. The windows were fogged with breath, and outside was a gray, cold, silent late November morning, as if the entire town were holding its breath. Emily sat near the back, both hands wrapped around the brown cloth bag on her lap. The woman sitting across from her glanced at the bag, then at Emily's pale face, but asked nothing. In small towns, people often knew when to be curious and when to let a stranger keep the last piece of silence for herself. The bag was so small it was almost absurd for someone on her way to the hospital. Inside there was only a nightgown, a toothbrush, the paperback novel she had borrowed from the library, the blue wool scarf her mother had knitted for her many winters ago, and a paper envelope hidden deep beneath the lining. If anyone opened that bag, they would think Emily was a woman poorly prepared for a short hospital stay. They would be wrong. That envelope did not hold love letters, old photographs, or anything fragile. It held copies of bank statements, home repair receipts, loan payment records, and documents Ryan Cole had never known she kept. For years, he had always said Emily was not good with money. He said she was only suited for books, children, and those free reading sessions at the library. He said it in a voice that was half joking, half pitying, and other people often laughed along. Ryan did not know that the woman he underestimated had quietly recorded everything. The bus jolted over a pothole. Emily tightened her grip on the bag. A faint ache low in her abdomen made her breathe in slowly. She did not want to think too much about the surgery. Dr. Samuel Haynes had explained everything clearly, calmly, and responsibly. The tumor was benign, but it needed to be treated soon. The surgery had a strong chance of success, but the human body was not a problem that could be guaranteed with absolute certainty. He had not tried to frighten her, and he had not offered beautiful promises either. Emily respected that. But in the moment she heard him speak, she still wished someone could hold her hand and tell her she did not have to walk through all of it alone. Ryan had not done that. That morning, her kitchen felt colder than usual. Emily woke before the alarm and saw that the hallway light was already on. Ryan was wearing his coat, holding a cup of coffee, his eyes fixed on his phone. On the kitchen table lay a small note. "I have an early meeting. Call yourself a car, okay?" There was no good luck. No question asking whether she was scared. Not even one awkward hug. Emily stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at the man who had lived with her for 8 years. He was tall, polite, his shirt neatly pressed, his cologne faint, his face carrying the confidence of a man who always believed he could explain every selfish act with 2 words: work obligations. When he looked up, his eyes slid over the cloth bag in her hand, then stopped on the clock. "The hospital is close," he said. "You can manage, right?" Emily had wanted to ask, "If you were the one lying in a hospital bed, would you want me to say that to you?" But she did not ask. Not because she was weak, but because some conversations had ended long ago and people simply had not signed the papers yet. She only nodded. Ryan left the house very quickly. The door closed so gently it was almost polite. And it was that politeness that made the house feel even crueler. A marriage did not always end with the sound of something breaking. Sometimes it ended with one person walking out the door, on the morning the other needed them most, and still remembering to lock it carefully behind him. Emily did not call a car. She walked to the bus stop, not because she had no money, not because she wanted to punish herself. She chose the bus because she needed a few minutes to look back at Briarwood, the town that had watched her grow up, love the wrong man, stay silent too long, and finally step into the hospital carrying a small bag and a very heavy truth. Beyond the glass, Main Street appeared beneath a veil of cold mist. Mrs. Nora's bakery was already open, its yellow light spilling onto the wet sidewalk. The pharmacy on the corner had a winter sale sign hanging in the window. The gray stone church stood quietly behind a row of bare maple trees. A little farther away was the Briarwood Community Library, the old red brick building with worn stone steps. Emily looked toward it longer than anywhere else. If there was anything she was afraid of losing, it was not Ryan's armchair in the living room, not the black mug he always placed on the lower shelf, not the suffocating silent dinners that stretched too long. It was the children's reading room at the back of the library. It was the faded green rugs. It was the smell of old paper and damp coats after school. It was Oliver, the boy who used to hate reading but who, last week, had read 3 full pages without stumbling. It was Sophie, the girl who always asked why the female character in fairy tales had to wait for someone else to come and save her. That question had followed Emily for days. Why wait for someone else to save you? She looked at her reflection in the bus window. A 35-year-old woman with a gentle face, tired eyes, a blue wool scarf around her neck, and a cloth bag on her lap. If Ryan saw her now, he would probably still think she was easy to persuade. If his lawyer saw her, he would probably think the same. A soft-spoken librarian. A wife used to giving way. A woman being admitted to the hospital, worried, alone, with no appearance of being a threat to anyone. That was their greatest mistake. Emily did not have a loud voice. She did not like arguments. She did not walk into a room and make everyone turn around. But she remembered every payment she had made, every invoice she had signed, every time Ryan said he would handle it, and in the end, she was the one who quietly solved the problem. She knew the townhouse was not only his, as he liked to tell people. She knew the cabin by the lake had not stood firm through storm seasons on its own. She knew the envelope at the bottom of her bag might not make her less afraid of surgery, but it could help keep her from being erased from her own life. The bus slowed in front of St. Helena Medical Center. The hospital appeared beyond the low trees, white and quiet beneath the winter sky. The automatic glass doors opened and closed as people came and went. An elderly man was helped down from a car by his daughter. A nurse who had just finished her shift stood outside, drawing the cold air into her lungs as if she needed to wake herself before going home. A black car stopped near the inpatient entrance. The back door opened, and a tall man stepped out with a book tucked under his arm. Emily only caught a glimpse of him. Dark hair touched with gray, a slow, measured way of walking, a dark coat. Nothing stood out in a way that would make people turn their heads, but there was an unusual stillness around him, as if, in the middle of the hospital's hurried morning, he carried a quiet place of his own. She did not yet know his name was Nathan Reed. She had even less idea that this man had enough power to make people like Ryan weigh every word carefully, if one day they stood before him. At that moment, to Emily, he was only a stranger, entering the hospital at the same time she was. She got off the bus, the cloth bag on her shoulder. The cold wind struck her face at once, making her eyes sting. Emily stood in front of the hospital doors for a few seconds, looking through the glass into the bright lobby. Inside were the reception desk, the elevators, the white corridors, the scent of antiseptic, the medical questions she would have to answer, and a hospital room she had never stepped into before. Behind her was a cold marriage. Before her was a surgery. Inside her bag was proof. And somewhere very close, a stranger was holding his book, preparing to walk into the very room that would change the rest of her life. Emily drew in a deep breath. Then she stepped through the glass doors. She did not know whether today would be the weakest day of her life, but later, when she looked back on that morning, she would understand. It was the day the world thought she had come to the hospital to be saved. In truth, it was the day she began saving herself. She did not begin saving herself with some grand act, not with a scream, and not by turning around and running from the house that had exhausted her for so many years. Emily Carter began with something much smaller. She stepped into the hospital lobby, gave her name at the reception desk, signed the papers that needed to be signed, and kept the cloth bag close to her side, as if she were holding on to the last piece of her life that no one had touched yet. The woman at the reception desk asked for her name in a flat, even voice. Emily answered. They asked for her date of birth, contact information, and the person they could call if necessary. She hesitated for one beat when she heard that question. In a normal marriage, that name should have come out naturally. My husband, Ryan Cole. But as the receptionist's pen paused over the blank line, Emily felt a long silence open inside her. Ryan was somewhere out there, in his neatly pressed shirt, probably holding an expensive cup of coffee and telling someone he had an important meeting. He would not say that his wife was being admitted to the hospital. He would not say that she had taken the bus by herself on a cold morning. He certainly would not say that before leaving the house, he had left behind a short note, as if her trip to the hospital were just another errand in the day. Emily wrote Grace Miller's name in the contact field. Grace was her friend from the library, the kind of woman who spoke too directly, laughed too loudly, and always looked at Emily as if she wanted to ask why she kept forgiving things that did not deserve forgiveness. Emily did not call her mother. Not because she did not love her. It was because she loved her that she was afraid to hear Helen's voice tremble on the other end of the line. After finishing the paperwork, she sat in the row of chairs by the window. Outside, snow had not fallen yet, but the sky hung low and heavy, as if one strong breath could break the clouds open into white. While she waited for a nurse to call her name, Emily looked at her reflection in the glass and suddenly remembered the first time Ryan appeared at the Briarwood Community Library. It had been an early autumn afternoon. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, falling in golden strips across the old wooden floor. Emily was rearranging the self-improvement section when Ryan walked in, carrying a faint scent of cologne and the confidence of a man who had never had to wonder whether he was welcome. He asked her about a finance book, but his eyes stayed on her face longer than they needed to. He spoke with charm. He laughed at the right moments. He asked the right questions. When Emily said she ran a free reading program for children, he seemed genuinely impressed. He said it was beautiful work. He said society needed more people like her. Back then, Emily had blushed. She had believed he truly saw the best part of her. Later, she would understand that some people were very good at praising something until it belonged to them. Then, once they had it, they no longer needed to look at it. Ryan pursued Emily with polished persistence. He appeared at the coffee shop she liked, remembered the tea she usually ordered, drove her home on rainy evenings, and spoke to her mother with a respectful voice that made Helen unable to do anything but nod back in greeting. But after that first meeting, when Ryan left, Emily's mother stood by the window for a very long time. She said, "That man shines too brightly. Be careful, sweetheart. Strong light can sometimes keep you from seeing the dark corners." At the time, Emily thought her mother was being too suspicious. Helen had lived alone for years after losing her husband. She sewed to raise her daughter, mended old clothes, saved every coin, and looked at life with the eyes of someone who had paid dearly for trusting too easily. Emily thought her mother was simply afraid of letting her go. She thought love needed a little recklessness. She had been reckless. But Ryan was not the one who paid the price. During the first year after the wedding, everything looked fine from the outside. Ryan had a good job in insurance. Emily worked at the library. They bought the townhouse on Alder Street, a small but bright place with a kitchen overlooking the backyard and a window corner wide enough for a plant. Ryan said he had made the down payment, so the house was his first major achievement. Emily smiled and did not correct him. She also did not tell anyone that after that, month by month, her salary flowed into the loan, the bills, the repairs, and the shortages Ryan liked to call temporary. Temporary was one of Ryan's favorite words. He was temporarily short on money because an investment had not returned yet. Temporarily busy, so he could not go with her to the library fundraiser. Temporarily not ready to have children because the market was uncertain. Temporarily needing Emily to understand because he was building his career. Those temporary things stretched into years. Emily did not notice it right away. No one notices a tree leaning after only one small gust of wind. But day after day, the center of gravity in the house slowly shifted toward Ryan. His armchair sat in the middle of the living room. His television programs played every evening. His friends came over for dinner, while Emily's co-workers were rarely invited because Ryan said the house was small and too many people would be inconvenient. Emily's books were moved from the living room to the study, then from the study down to the basement because he wanted the space to look neater. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, only the moments when Emily stepped back a little, then a little more, then a little more again, until one day she realized she was living in a house she helped pay for, yet still asking whether she was allowed to place a potted plant on the windowsill. Ryan was not the kind of man who was cruel all the time. That was what made everything harder to name. He could bring her a small cake on their anniversary. He could praise her in front of other people. He could say she was the kindest woman he knew. But every compliment came with an invisible limit. In Ryan's mouth, kind meant, do not make things difficult for him. Gentle meant, do not ask too many questions. Reasonable meant, sign whatever he had already decided. Emily had learned to stay silent because she thought silence preserved peace. But silence did not preserve peace. It only kept the person causing the hurt from feeling uncomfortable. Her work at the library became the only place where she could still hear her own heart clearly. There she was not Ryan's wife. She was Miss Emily, the one who knew which book suited Oliver, knew Sophie preferred stories with female characters who chose their own lives, knew Mrs. Whitman always borrowed romance novels, while pretending she had only come in to read the newspaper. In that small reading room, Emily had value not because she pleased anyone, but because she was truly present. Ryan had never remembered Oliver's or Sophie's name. Whenever Emily talked about them, he only murmured a response and looked at his phone. Once she told him the reading program might receive funding if she finished the application before the end of the month. Ryan sighed and said she was always spending her energy on things that would not make them any richer. That day, Emily did not argue. But that night she opened her laptop and completed the application close to midnight. She also created a new folder and saved every personal bank document she had. At first, it was simply a careful habit. Later, it became a quiet way to remind herself that the truth still existed, even when no one wanted to hear it yet. Then Ryan began coming home later. He said there were clients, conferences, business dinners. Emily had once stood in the hallway, listening to the key turn very late at night, watching Ryan step inside with a tired smile and the scent of perfume that did not belong to their house. She had almost asked. But Ryan only looked at her and said, "You're still awake," in a tone that made her wakefulness sound like the thing that needed explaining. And she stopped asking. Not because she did not know, but because a person who has been made to doubt herself for too long begins to fear even the right answer. Her name was called. Emily rose from the waiting chair. An older nurse came toward her, silver hair pinned neatly back, eyes kind but alert. The name badge on her chest read Martha Wells. She held Emily's file and smiled with just enough warmth. "Miss Carter, I'll take you up to your room." Emily nodded and picked up the cloth bag. The envelope inside brushed lightly against her hip. A silent reminder. She was not walking into the hospital with only fear. She was walking in with proof, with memory, and with a piece of strength Ryan had never seen because he had been too busy looking at himself. Martha led her toward the elevator. When the doors opened, Emily stepped inside and looked again at her reflection in the metal wall. She still looked tired, still looked small, still looked like the kind of woman many people could underestimate at first glance. But today, Emily no longer saw that as a disadvantage. A person who is underestimated can observe longer, prepare more carefully, and when the time comes to stand up, they often make the whole room fall silent. The elevator rose. Martha looked at the file, then paused slightly. "There is a small change, Miss Carter. At the moment, we do not have any private rooms available. You will be in a shared room. The other patient is a man, but he is very quiet. I believe you will be comfortable." Emily heard the words, and for 1 second her hand tightened around the strap of her bag. She did not know who was behind the door of that hospital room. She did not know that the man was holding a paper book, or that his name would become a turning point in her life. She only breathed in, breathed out, and answered in a calm voice, "It's all right. I can stay there." The elevator doors opened on the patient floor. At the end of the hallway, winter light fell through a large window, white and still. Emily followed Martha 1 step at a time, moving a little farther away from the woman who had grown used to waiting for Ryan to decide, and closer to the room where, for the first time, a stranger would see her exactly as she was. The room Emily was led into sat at the very end of the hallway, where the footsteps of the hospital had softened into distant, thin sounds. Martha Wells opened the door first, then leaned slightly aside so Emily could step in. Winter light poured through the large window at the far end of the room. Not bright, not warm, just white and still, laying a kind of distant calm over everything. Emily stopped just beyond the doorway. 2 hospital beds stood parallel to each other. The one near the door was empty, its blanket folded neatly, its pillow propped upright, the small table beside it so clean it looked as if it had never belonged to anyone. The bed beside the window was already occupied. No, not exactly occupied by someone lying down. The man was sitting with his back against the pillows, a paper book open in his hands, his tall frame covered by a pale hospital gown and a thin blanket. He was not looking at a phone. He had not turned on the television. He was not trying to fill the room with noise. He was simply reading, slowly, as if the hospital, time, and everything left unsaid could all wait for him to finish 1 page. When Emily stepped inside, he looked up. It was not the kind of look she was used to. Ryan often looked at her the way people look at an object in a house they know too well. Seen, acknowledged, then passed over. Other people sometimes looked at her with soft pity when she said her husband was busy, or with quick judgment when they saw how simply she dressed, how quietly she spoke, how carefully she moved. But this man looked at her as a complete person, not intruding, not examining, not rushing to decide who she was, just looking and acknowledging that she was there. "Good morning," he said. His voice was deep, low, with just enough warmth to make the room feel a little less unfamiliar. Emily answered, "Good morning." Martha placed the file on the table beside the empty bed, pulled the divider curtain halfway across, then spoke to Emily gently. "This will be your bed. If you need anything, just press the call button. Dr. Haynes will come by to check on you later. You do not need to change yet. Just rest for a bit first." Then she turned to the man by the window. "Mr. Reed, I will come back to check your blood pressure in a few minutes." The man nodded. "Thank you, Martha." He called her by her name, not nurse, not a careless nod. He said her name the way a person does when he is used to seeing the effort of others. Emily noticed it immediately. She always noticed small things. A person who has lived too long in being overlooked learns to see what other people miss. The way someone closes a door, the way they say thank you, the way they make room for silence. Martha left, leaving Emily with the unfamiliar man and the space between the two beds. He closed his book and placed one finger between the pages to mark his place. "I am Nathan Reed. It seems we will be sharing this room for a short while." "Emily Carter," she said. "It is nice to meet you, though the circumstances are probably not the kind anyone would choose." That sentence could have become a flat piece of small talk if spoken in another voice. But Nathan said it calmly, without trying to win her over, without trying to make her laugh. Emily felt she did not need to play the cheerful patient just to make someone else feel relieved. She only nodded. "Same here." Then silence fell. Strangely, it was not heavy. The silence in the house Emily had shared with Ryan always had thorns. It sat between them at dinner, on the sofa, in the bedroom, in the missed calls and the questions she no longer dared to ask. It was not peace. It was forbidden ground, a place filled with things that, if touched, would make someone uncomfortable. The silence in this room was different. It was like the surface of a lake in winter, cold but smooth. It did not demand that she explain herself. It did not force her to apologize for existing. Emily set her bag down on the bed. She took out the blue wool scarf first and folded it carefully. Then the paperback novel, the toothbrush, the nightgown. The paper envelope remained deep beneath the lining, exactly where it belonged. She did not check it, but her hand stayed at the mouth of the bag for a little longer than necessary. Nathan saw the gesture. He did not ask. To Emily, that not asking was also a kind of kindness. She sat down on the edge of the bed. The hospital mattress made a faint rustling sound. On the ceiling there was a thin crack running from the corner of the light toward the window, like a small river branch on an old map. Emily looked at that crack and felt time slow down. Tomorrow she would be taken through the white corridors. Tomorrow everything inside her body would be entrusted to the hands of doctors and the precision of machines. Tomorrow she would have to trust people who were almost more like strangers than the husband who had not brought her here. "What do you do, Miss Carter?" Nathan asked. The question came gently, as if it had been set down rather than thrown across. Emily almost said, "I am just a librarian." That word, just, had followed her for far too long. Ryan used it often, even when he did not say it directly. "You just work at the library. You just take care of those children. You just do not understand the pressure I am under." Those words were small, but over the years they could cut a person down into a lesser version of herself. This time Emily did not use it. "I run the community reading program at the Briarwood Library," she said, "mostly for children after school and a few elderly patrons. I also manage the children's section." Nathan nodded, but not in a social way. He set the book down completely. "That sounds like work that takes a great deal of patience." Emily was a little surprised. Most people say it sounds easy. Maybe because they have never tried convincing a child that a page is not the enemy. Emily looked at him. A very small smile touched the corner of her mouth before she could stop it. "You are right. There is a boy named Oliver who used to hate reading. Every time I handed him a book, he looked at me as if I were giving him a punishment. Last week, he read 3 straight pages of an adventure story. Not perfectly, but he finished them. Afterward, he smiled like he had just won a major competition." Nathan listened. Truly listened. That made Emily continue. She told him about Sophie, the girl who always asked questions that made adults stop and think. She told him about Mrs. Whitman, who always borrowed romance novels and then hid the covers beneath the local newspaper. She told him about the reading room with the old green rug and the little chairs that never stayed in straight lines. As she spoke, her voice softened. A quiet trace of life returned to her face, like light slipping into a house after the curtains had been drawn open. Nathan saw that. He also saw something else. When Emily talked about the library, she sat straighter. When she mentioned the children, her eyes brightened. But every time footsteps paused near the door in the hallway, her eyes moved there without thinking. Some part of her was still waiting for Ryan to appear. Nathan did not know who that husband was, but he had seen enough loneliness in his life to understand one simple truth. This woman was not only waiting for surgery, she was waiting to find out whether she had truly been left behind. No one came. At noon, Martha returned with a younger nurse to check some information. Emily answered each question carefully. When asked whether a family member had come with her, she paused very briefly. "I came by myself," she said. The younger nurse wrote it down without looking up. Martha looked up. She said nothing, but something softened in her eyes. Nathan heard it too, though he was looking down at his book. By myself. Those two words stayed in the room longer than Emily's voice. After Martha left, Nathan asked, "Would you like to call someone?" Emily looked at the phone on the table. "My friend knows I was admitted. My mother does not. You do not want her to worry?" "Yes." Nathan did not comment right away. He only looked out the window. Outside, the hospital courtyard was empty, the red maple standing in the gray, a few last leaves clinging to its branches, as if refusing to let go. "Sometimes the people who love us worry not because we burden them," he said, "but because they love us." Emily lowered her eyes. The sentence was not a reproach, but it touched exactly where she was hiding. She knew her mother would want to come. She knew Grace would want to come. She also knew Ryan should have been here without needing to be called. In the afternoon, Nathan was taken away for a check related to his earlier treatment. Before leaving the room, he folded a slip of paper into a bookmark and placed the book on the table beside his bed. A hospital staff member confirmed his name, then prepared to take him out. For reasons she did not quite understand, Emily asked, "Are you worried?" Nathan paused. He looked at her, and for a moment the calm on his face became deeper, more real. "Yes," he said, "but I have learned that worry should not be the one driving." Then he left the room. Emily remained alone. The room suddenly seemed wider, not exactly frightening, but colder. She looked at the empty bed beside the window, the book resting face down on the table, the red maple in the courtyard. That unfamiliar man had only spoken to her a handful of times, yet when he was gone, she realized his presence had made the room easier to breathe in. That unsettled her. After 8 years of living beside someone who made her feel invisible, the simple fact that a stranger knew how to listen was enough to make her heart realize how long it had been starved. Near evening, Nathan was brought back. He looked tired, his face paler, but he was alert. Martha told him to rest, then drew the curtain slightly to soften the light. Emily waited until the room settled again before speaking. "Is everything all right?" Nathan turned his head toward her. "All right. Thank you." That was all. But there was no empty politeness in his thanks. There was recognition that she had asked sincerely. And because of that, Emily felt a very thin thread stretch between the two beds. Night fell quickly. Briarwood sank into the dark blue of winter. Hallway light spilled through the crack beneath the door. Emily lay in bed, looking at the crack in the ceiling. Tomorrow would be her surgery. The fear was still there, resting beneath her ribs. But the room no longer felt entirely foreign. By the window, Nathan Reed closed his eyes to rest. He had not told her who he truly was. He had not spoken of the buildings that carried his company's name, the investment funds, the meetings where people fell silent when he began to speak. Emily did not yet know that the man reading a book in this hospital room could make those who had underestimated her think again. For now, he was only Nathan, a stranger who did not make her feel small. And for Emily, on the evening before her surgery, that was enough to make the room feel less cold, but not enough for her to sleep. Night in a hospital was not like night at home. At home, darkness carried the scent of old wood, washed blankets, coffee still lingering in the kitchen, and all the things left unsaid lying quietly between two people. In a hospital, darkness was cleaner, thinner, but also more honest. It hid nothing. It let the sound of cartwheels in the hallway ring out clearly. It let the pale blue light slip through the crack beneath the door. It let a person hear her own breathing and realize exactly how afraid she was. Emily lay on her back in the bed near the door, her eyes open, staring at the thin crack in the ceiling. By day, that crack looked like a branch of a river on an old map. At night, under the hospital's cold light, it looked like a boundary line. On one side was her old life, the townhouse on Alder Street, Ryan's armchair, the library, the children, the silent dinners. On the other side was tomorrow morning, the operating room, anesthesia, and answers no one could guarantee with absolute certainty. She knew she was in the hands of trained professionals. Dr. Haynes had explained everything clearly and carefully. There had been no fear-mongering, no exaggeration. But the calmness of medicine did not erase the deeply human fear inside her chest. Emily was not afraid in a loud way. She was afraid in silence. She placed both hands on the blanket, keeping them from trembling. She breathed slowly, counting each breath in her mind, then forgetting where she had left off. In the bed beside the window, Nathan Reed was not asleep either. He lay turned toward the window, but his eyes were still open. Outside, the red maple stood in the hospital's back courtyard, with only a few last leaves clinging to its branches. Nathan looked at it without really seeing it. His mind was somewhere else, in another hallway, another night far away, yet one that had never completely left him. He knew the woman in the bed across from him was trying not to cry. Not because she made a sound, because she did not. Nathan had learned that people who were used to enduring pain often did not make noise when they hurt. They adjusted their pillows very slowly. They turned their faces away. They swallowed their breath, as if tears were a private matter no one else should see. Emily Carter did all of that with a practiced ease that made Nathan's heart feel heavy. A woman should not be so good at hiding fear. Outside, the wind brushed lightly against the glass. Somewhere in the hallway, a small laugh rose and disappeared at once, perhaps from a nurse trying to keep her spirits up after a long shift. The hospital stayed alive in its own way, while Emily waited for a morning that could change her whole life. At last, Nathan spoke. "You are thinking too much." Emily froze. The sentence did not sound like a reproach. It felt like someone setting a lamp down outside a dark room. She turned her head toward him. In the dimness, she could only see the outline of his face, calm and angled toward the light beyond the window. "How do you know?" "Because I am doing the same thing," Nathan answered. Emily was silent for a while. His answer made her less defensive. If he had told her not to think anymore, she would have felt dismissed. If he had told her everything would be fine, she would have felt he was rushing too quickly past someone else's fear. but he only admitted that he, too, was inside a sleepless night. She looked back at the ceiling. I keep thinking that if I close my eyes, morning will come faster. Morning will come whether you close your eyes or not. That is not very comforting. Nathan turned his head toward her. In the dark, his eyes seemed to soften. I am not very good at comforting people. Emily almost smiled. At least you are honest. A silence passed between them. It was not uncomfortable. It felt like a narrow bridge laid between the two beds. Neither of them hurried to cross it, but both knew it was there. I used to think I could control everything, Nathan said after a while. Work, schedules, people I needed to meet, money that needed to be spent, risks that needed to be avoided. I built my whole life on that idea. Emily listened. She did not turn all the way toward him, afraid it might hurt, but her eyes had left the crack in the ceiling. And then? Nathan looked out the window. The red maple was only a thin shadow now. Then one day I understood that some things happened without asking your permission first. His voice did not break. It did not tremble, but the calm in it could not hide the depth beneath. Emily felt that behind those words was a closed room where he had stored many losses. She did not knock on that room. No one should force someone to open a wound simply because they were curious. How did you get through it? She asked. Nathan stayed silent longer. He did not want to hand her some beautiful false answer. A person about to go into surgery did not need truth covered in gloss. Not quickly, he said, and not as bravely as people probably thought. I only did small things. Woke up, drank water, signed one document, answered one call, walked a short distance, day after day. Then at some point you realize the fear is still there, but it is no longer sitting in the driver's seat. Emily remembered what he had said that afternoon. Worry should not be the one driving. That sentence of yours sounds like it cost you a great deal, she said. Nathan did not deny it. It did. That truth made Emily feel her throat tighten. She had heard Ryan say so many certain things. He said everything would be fine if she worried less. He said she overthought everything. He said she was too driven by emotion. Those sentences sounded strong, but in truth, they only pushed her farther away from her own feelings. Nathan was different. He did not take the fear away from her. He only sat across the room and acknowledged that it had a right to exist. I am afraid, Emily said very softly. I know. Not just of the surgery. Nathan did not ask right away. He let her choose which door she wanted to open. I am afraid of waking up and finding out I no longer have a chance to have children. I am afraid of not waking up. I am afraid my mother will find out and be hurt. I am afraid the children at the library will wait for me and then forget me. And the worst part is, I am afraid that if something happens, Ryan will only find it inconvenient. The last sentence fell heavier than all the others. Nathan closed his eyes for a second. Inside him, a cold, quiet anger rose. Not the kind of anger that wanted to break something. It was the kind that belonged to someone who saw injustice too clearly and began remembering every detail. He had not met Ryan, had not seen that man's face, but he was already beginning to understand the kind of person who could make a woman lying in a hospital bed fear that she would become an inconvenience to her own husband. You are not an inconvenience, Nathan said. Emily turned toward him. You do not even know me. I know enough to say that. For reasons she did not fully understand, his answer made her eyes burn. It was not a compliment, not pity. It felt like a simple confirmation she had been waiting for far too long. She was not an inconvenience, not a burden, not a task to be arranged around someone else's meeting schedule. She was only a human being who was afraid. And that was allowed. Emily raised a hand to wipe the corner of her eye before the tears could fall. Nathan saw it, but did not stare. He turned his face back toward the window, giving her a small pocket of privacy in a room where no true privacy existed. "Does your mother know you were admitted?" he asked after a while. "Not yet. She will be angry, definitely. But she will come." Emily was silent. Helen would come, even if it snowed, even if her legs hurt, even if she had to ask a neighbor for a ride. She would come, sit beside the bed, scold Emily for hiding it, and then hold her hand very tightly. Emily knew that. And because she knew it, her heart sank even more. "I did not want to scare her," she said. Nathan answered very gently. "Sometimes being allowed to worry about someone we love is a right." The sentence made Emily close her eyes. For years, she had taken pride in not bothering anyone, not bothering Ryan, not bothering her mother, not bothering Grace, not bothering her co-workers. But perhaps beneath that pride was an old sadness. She had grown used to living as if her needs were something that had to be made smaller. Outside, snow began to fall. At first, only a few flakes, almost invisible. Then more of them, soft and light, touching the window glass and melting into thin streaks of water. The red maple wore a very fine layer of white across its branches. The last leaves still clung there, dark red beneath the snow, stubborn in a way that was almost beautiful. Nathan looked at them. "Do you see that maple tree?" Emily turned her head just enough to look out the window. "Yes, it has almost lost all its leaves," he said, "but the last ones are still holding on. Maybe they do not know how to let go. Or maybe they are waiting for the right time." Emily looked at the maple for a long while. The sentence stayed with her, slipping into the places where fear had been taking up space. Maybe she was like that too. Not unable to let go, only waiting for the right time. Waiting until there was enough proof, enough courage, enough clarity, enough pain to stop calling endurance peace. She thought of the paper envelope in her bag, thought of each receipt, each bank statement, thought of Ryan believing she would always be the woman who lowered her head. Without meaning to, her breath deepened a little. Nathan noticed the change. Very small, but real. "Miss Carter," he said, "tomorrow morning when you are afraid, remember one thing. You do not have to solve your entire life on the way to the operating room. You only have to go through one door." Emily looked at him. "And after that?" "Then the next door." She laughed softly, very carefully this time, so it would not hurt her body. "You truly are not very good at comforting people." "Maybe not, but I am fairly good at breaking down problems that look impossible to survive." It was an ordinary sentence, but within it, another part of Nathan's identity briefly appeared. Emily still did not know who he was, but she could feel that he was not a man who only spoke in theory. Some people carried the calm of those who had made decisions while everyone else panicked. Nathan was that kind of man. His power was not loud. It lived in the way he looked at a long night and said, "You only have to go through one door." The night kept moving. Emily did not fall asleep right away, but fear was no longer the only thing lying beside her. Beside it was Nathan's sentence, the image of the red maple, the thought of her mother, the paper envelope in her bag, the children at the library, Sophie's question about why anyone should wait for someone else to save them. Near morning, Emily drifted off for a while. In a brief dream, she saw herself standing in the library between tall shelves of books. Sophie sat on the green rug, looking up and asking the familiar question. Why does the female character have to wait for someone else to save her? This time in the dream, Emily answered, maybe she just does not know she has the key yet. When she woke, the sky outside was still dim, Snow lay lightly over the hospital courtyard. Nathan was in the other bed with his eyes closed, his breathing even. The red maple stood still outside the window, and the last leaves had not yet fallen. Emily placed her hand on the white blanket and felt her heart beating fast, but clear. She was still afraid, but inside that fear, for the first time in many years, there was a part of her that no longer wanted to hide. Morning arrived with the soft vibration of the phone on the table beside the bed. The sound was small, but in the quiet hospital room it struck like a sudden knock against Emily's chest. She opened her eyes. Outside the window, a thin layer of snow covered the hospital's back courtyard. The red maple was still standing there, its final leaves clinging to the branches, dark red against the white, like a few small flames refusing to go out. Emily lay still for a few seconds. The fear from last night had not gone anywhere. It had only stepped back, making room for a more fragile kind of calm. Today was the day of the surgery. Today, she had to walk through the first door, just as Nathan had said. Only one door. After that, she could think about the next one. The phone vibrated again. She reached for it. In the brief moment before the screen fully lit up, Emily thought of Grace. Maybe her friend had sent a message wishing her well, or maybe her mother somehow had sensed something. But the name that appeared was not Grace, not her mother. Ryan. Those 4 letters alone were enough to make the room feel colder. Emily stared at the screen longer than she needed to. 8 years of marriage created strange reflexes. Even when the heart was exhausted, the fingers still knew how to open a message from a husband. Even when trust had cracked, a small part of her still hoped for one decent sentence. I will come later. I am sorry I did not take you this morning. I hope everything goes well. If he had written even one sentence like that, perhaps Emily could have breathed a little easier. But Ryan had not written that. I have thought this through. We should end this marriage. I will have my lawyer contact you after you are feeling better. I think it is best that we keep some distance from now on and communicate through paperwork. As for the hospital costs, you have insurance, so I cannot help with anything else. Do not call right now. I have something important to handle. Emily read it once, then read it again. The words did not change. There was no typo to make them less clear, no sentence after them to save them from their own coldness. Ryan was not coming to the hospital. Ryan was not asking whether she was afraid. Ryan was not asking what time her surgery would be. He had chosen this morning, right before she walked into an important medical procedure, to place a period at the end of 8 years of marriage with a few neat lines of text, as tidy as a work memo. At first, Emily did not cry. She just sat there, the phone in her hand, feeling every sound pull farther away. The wheels of a cart in the hallway, the hum of the heater, someone speaking softly at the nurse's station. Everything faded, leaving behind a blank white space. 8 years. 8 years of waking earlier so the kitchen would smell like the coffee Ryan liked. 8 years of pushing her own plans aside because his plans were always called more important. 8 years of contributing to the mortgage, fixing the roof, replacing pipes, doing whatever had to be done, then hearing Ryan tell other people that he had built a stable life. 8 years of waiting for a small family, waiting for a child, waiting for one evening when Ryan would truly look at her and ask, "How was your day?" And now, on the morning when she needed a hand beside her most, he sent her a message telling her not to call. The tears came slowly. At first, they only blurred the screen. Then one dropped onto her wrist. Emily breathed in, but the breath broke halfway through. She bent forward, holding the phone against her chest, her shoulders trembling. She was not crying because of a message. She was crying because the message contained her entire marriage. A marriage that had always told her to understand him, to wait a little longer, not to make things complicated, to shrink herself small enough to fit around someone else's convenience. In the bed beside the window, Nathan opened his eyes. He had been awake already. Nathan did not speak at once. He watched Emily, watched the way she tried to lower her face so the crying would not spill out too much, watched her hand gripping the phone as if it were a sharp piece of ice. He understood that in certain moments, rushing in to help could also become a kind of intrusion. So he waited. Then he slowly sat up, took the glass of water from his own table, walked to Emily's bed and placed it beside her. He pulled a chair over and sat down, not on her bed, not touching her, not demanding that she tell him anything right away. "What happened?" Nathan asked, his voice low. Emily could not answer. She only handed him the phone. Nathan took it. He read quickly, but when he reached the final line, his eyes stayed there longer. "Do not call right now." A sentence softer than many crueler words in the world, yet in this moment, it had the power to wound more deeply than a shout. Nathan gave the phone back. His face remained calm, but Emily saw his jaw tighten. A small sign, sharp as a crack in glass. "Can you postpone today's schedule?" he asked. Emily wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her voice had gone hoarse. "No. Dr. Haynes said it should be done on schedule. I want it over with too. I do not want to stretch this fear out any longer." Nathan nodded. He did not argue with the truth. He did not tell her to think positively. He did not say everything would be fine like a slogan. He only placed both hands on his knees and spoke slowly. "Then today, you only need to do one thing. Get through this morning. Leave everything else for later." Emily looked at him through wet eyes. "Do you always break everything down like that?" "When something is too large, it is the only way not to be swallowed by it." The sentence was ordinary, but it held Emily in place. She did not need to solve her broken marriage right now. She did not need to answer Ryan's lawyer. She did not need to decide where she would live, how she would keep the house, or how she would tell her mother. She only had to get through this morning. Just one door. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Martha Wells came in, holding a file and wearing a smile gentler than usual. She looked at Emily, then at the glass of water on the table, then at Nathan sitting in the chair. As someone who had spent enough years in this work, Martha understood that some things did not need to be asked aloud. "Miss Carter," she said softly, "we will begin preparing in a few minutes. Take your time." Emily nodded. Nathan stood so Martha could check a few details. When he turned back toward his own bed, Emily suddenly called out, "Mr. Reed!" Nathan stopped. "Thank you," she said. "For the water?" "For not telling me I have to be strong." Nathan looked at her. In his eyes was a tenderness he held very carefully. "You do not have to perform strength for anyone." Emily lowered her head. The sentence touched her more deeply than she wanted to admit. For years she had performed being fine, in front of her mother so her mother would not worry, in front of Grace so her friend would not hate Ryan, in front of her co-workers so no one would see how cold her house really was, in front of Ryan himself so he would not call her too sensitive. Today she no longer wanted to perform. A hospital staff member knocked on the door and said Nathan needed to go for a short check before the doctor reviewed his file. Nathan put on his outer layer and picked up the book from the table. Before stepping out, he turned back to Emily. "You will not be alone in this room for long." Maybe it was because she was tired. Maybe because Ryan's message had cracked the last shell around her. Maybe because last night Nathan had given her an honest answer instead of an empty promise. Emily suddenly spoke, her voice still hoarse but clear. "You are much kinder than my husband." If I get through today, maybe I should marry you." The sentence landed in the room like a glass set down too quickly on a table. Emily almost wanted to take it back at once. It was half joke, half pain, a clumsy defense from someone who had just been left behind on the most important morning. She waited for Nathan to smile politely, or tell her not to think that way, or say she should focus on recovering first. But Nathan did not smile. He looked at her for one beat longer. No pity, no confusion, no dismissal. Then he gave a very small nod. "All right." Just one phrase. The hospital staff member was waiting outside. Nathan stepped out. The door closed behind him, leaving Emily sitting on the bed with reddened eyes, her heart wounded by a message and unsettled by an answer far too serious to dismiss. Surely he was only comforting her. Surely. But his voice had not sounded like someone joking. Martha returned to the side of the bed and helped Emily prepare.
She said what needed to be said in a calm voice, reminding Emily to breathe slowly, reminding her that Dr. Haynes was ready, that everything would be monitored carefully. Emily listened. She set her phone down, but before leaving the bed she looked at her cloth bag. The envelope was still inside. Ryan thought she would walk into this morning empty-handed. Ryan was wrong. She had fear, she had tears, she had a heart freshly betrayed. But she also had proof, memory, the right to say no, and now something very strange. A stranger had seen her in her weakest moment and had not mistaken her for a weak woman. As the stretcher rolled through the hallway, Emily watched the white ceiling lights drift above her. She was still afraid. But fear was no longer the only thing going with her. There was the red maple outside the window. There was Nathan's sentence. There was the envelope in her bag. There was Sophie's question from the library. Why wait for someone else to save you? Emily closed her eyes and drew in a deep breath. Maybe she was not waiting anymore. That thought was the last thing Emily held on to before the white light of the hallway softened into a blur. The stretcher rolled steadily beneath her. The ceiling lights passed overhead one by one, like pages of a book being turned too quickly for her to read. Beside her ear, Martha's voice reminded her to breathe slowly. There were footsteps from the hospital staff. There were doors opening and closing. Everything was calm, professional, safe. But Emily's heart still beat fast, as if she were running across a thin bridge between two shores of her life. Dr. Samuel Haynes was waiting for her in the bright, clean room. He leaned down and called her name in a steady voice. "Emily Carter, we will take very careful care of you. All you need to do is breathe slowly and think of something that makes you feel peaceful." Something peaceful. Emily tried to think of the library, of the green rug in the reading room, of Oliver smiling because he had read 3 pages of a story, of Sophie asking why the female character had to wait for someone else to save her. Then, in a strange way, her mind returned to the red maple outside the hospital room window. The last leaves still clung beneath the snow. They were not beautiful in a brilliant way. They were beautiful because they had not let go. Then everything drifted away. When Emily woke, the world came back very slowly. First came sound, the steady rhythm of a machine somewhere nearby, soft shoes moving through the hallway, a small voice, then silence. Then came light, no longer the bright white from before, but paler, softer, like a winter afternoon filtered through curtains. Finally, there was her body, heavy, tired, a dull ache that made her understand she had just gone through something important, but nothing as frightening or dramatic as her imagination had made it the night before. She opened her eyes. The thin crack in the ceiling appeared first. It was still there, still like a small river branch on an old map. Emily stared at that crack for a long time, and it took her a few seconds to understand what it meant.
She had returned to the hospital room. She was awake. She was still here. A trembling breath escaped her chest. It was not a sob, just a breath, but inside it lived an entire morning, a fear, a door she had passed through. Emily blinked, and tears slipped out quietly. She did not try to stop them. This time she was not crying because she had been left behind. She was crying because she had returned to her own body, to the familiar ceiling, to the distant sounds of the hospital, to the chance to keep opening her eyes to the world. Martha appeared beside the bed almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for the exact moment Emily woke. "Miss Carter, can you hear me?" Emily nodded faintly. "Very good. Everything has remained stable. Dr. Haynes will come in and speak with you, but for now, you only need to rest." Martha gave her a little water, very slowly, very carefully.
Her gentleness was not showy. It was in the way she adjusted the pillow so Emily would be less uncomfortable, the way she pulled the blanket up just enough, the way she did not ask unnecessary questions when she saw Emily's eyes were still wet. Not long after, Dr. Haynes stepped in. He wore the same familiar calm, but there was relief on his face, the kind that belonged to someone who had just completed something requiring great focus. "The surgery has been completed successfully," he said. "The tumor was treated according to plan. Your body will need time to recover, and we will continue monitoring you. As for fertility, we were able to preserve the most important things we could. Later, you will need regular checkups and professional guidance, but today, you can rest with some peace of mind." Emily listened to every sentence, not as if she were hearing a medical report, but as if someone were handing back pieces of her future. She was alive, and the door to motherhood, the one she had quietly stood before for so many years, had not been fully closed. She turned her face to the side, tears sliding onto the pillow. Dr. Haynes did not try to turn the moment into a speech. He only nodded to Martha and left the room, giving Emily the privacy she needed. When she had enough strength to turn her head toward the window, she saw Nathan. He was back in the bed beside hers. His face was slightly pale, but his eyes were open. The paper book rested on the table, still unread. Behind him, the red maple stood out against the hospital courtyard, covered in a thin layer of snow, like a small sign that the world outside was still waiting. Nathan looked at her. "How are you?" he asked. It took Emily a moment to answer. Her voice was hoarse, but clear. "I am still here." Nathan looked at her for another second. Something very slight passed across his face, almost impossible to name. But Emily saw it. It was relief. "Good," he said. Just one word. Nothing ornate, no attempt to be moving, and because of that, it was real. Emily had heard too many beautiful but hollow words in her life. Nathan's single word, "good," carried more weight in that moment than all the long promises Ryan had once made in front of a crowd. The first day after surgery passed in broken stretches of sleep and waking. Emily slept a lot. Each time she opened her eyes, the room was in a different state. Sometimes light slanted across the floor. Sometimes Martha checked the file. Sometimes Nathan looked out the window, quiet as someone guarding the stillness. He did not ask constant questions. He did not act excessively worried. He did not turn her recovery into a performance of kindness. He was simply present. And to Emily, that was already a great deal. By afternoon, a younger nurse stepped in. She had blonde hair tied neatly back, deep red polished nails, and a quick way of walking, as if every minute had already been counted. The name badge on her uniform read, Tessa Blake. She checked a few details, wrote in the file, then looked at Emily with an expression that was hard to read. "Your husband called," Tessa said. The whole room seemed to pause for one beat. Emily opened her eyes fully.
Ryan, Tessa nodded. He said he will stop by the house to pick up some personal belongings. He also said you should focus on recovering and not call him back right now. The paperwork will be handled later. Ryan's message that morning had hurt Emily, but this sentence was cold in a different way. She had just woken up from surgery. What Ryan wanted to know was not whether she was all right, but when he could collect his things. He was still using someone else to deliver his words, still keeping his distance, still turning her into a matter to be arranged. Emily looked at Tessa. She noticed one small thing. Tessa was not merely passing along information like a hospital employee. There was a slight familiarity in her voice when she mentioned Ryan. Someone else might have missed it. Emily did not. "Thank you," Emily said. Tessa seemed a little surprised by her calm. She waited for another second, perhaps expecting Emily to ask more, cry more, or show confusion. But Emily did not. At last, Tessa closed the file and left the room. When the door closed, Nathan set his book down. "She knows him," Emily said first. Nathan looked at her. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but I heard it in the way she said his name. It did not sound like an ordinary call from a patient's family member." Nathan did not answer right away. He had lived long enough in the world of contracts, negotiations, and sentences with double meanings to understand that instinct was sometimes the first evidence, even if it was not the final proof. He did not want to add to Emily's worry, but he did not dismiss what she felt either. "Remember that detail," he said. "No need to conclude anything yet." Emily turned her head toward him. His sentence made her feel respected. Ryan often either dismissed her feelings or turned them into proof that she was too sensitive. Nathan did neither. He did not rush to believe blindly, but he did not deny it. He simply placed it where it belonged. Near evening, Martha returned. She checked Emily carefully, told her to rest, then looked over at Nathan. "Mr. Reed, the doctor will see you tomorrow morning. If anything feels uncomfortable, press the call button right away." Mr. Reed. The way Martha said the name was entirely normal, yet Emily still heard the caution behind it. As Martha gathered the medication tray, she lingered beside Emily's bed a little longer than necessary. Her eyes moved toward Nathan, then back to Emily, as if she were wondering whether she should say something. At last, Martha lowered her voice. "Miss Cotter, do you know who he is?" Emily frowned slightly. "Nathan Reed?" Martha looked flustered. "I mean that Nathan Reed. Reed Holdings, the downtown restoration projects in Burlington, investment funds in Boston, office buildings along the Portland waterfront. People say he is one of the most influential businessmen in this region." Emily turned to look at Nathan. Nathan was looking at Martha, not angry, only very calm. "Martha," he said, "Miss Carter has just woken up after surgery. I am not sure my business resume is helpful to her recovery." Martha blushed. "I am sorry. I only thought she should know." She left faster than she had entered. The room became quiet again. Emily looked at Nathan. The man by the window, the man who had placed a glass of water beside her, the man who did not lie to someone who was afraid, the man who had answered when she said something that had sounded like despair. That man was not only kind, he had real power. The kind of power that did not need to raise its voice, introduce itself, or take over an entire room just to be noticed. Nathan closed his book. "That is only information," he said. "It is not who I am." Emily thought of Ryan, who always wanted everyone to know he had made the down payment, bought the house, built a life. She thought of the way he enlarged his own role and reduced hers. Then she looked at Nathan, who had so many things he could have displayed, and yet chose silence. She suddenly understood something. Some people were truly strong, so they did not need to make anyone else weak. and some people only felt large when they made others stand lower. Emily closed her eyes. Her body was tired, but her mind was clearer than it had been that morning. Ryan was taking things from the house. Tessa might not be only a nurse delivering a message. The divorce had just begun, and the man in the bed beside hers, the one she had thought was only a quiet patient reading a book, turned out to be someone who could enter any room and make those accustomed to underestimating her reconsider. But today, she did not need to use his power. Today, she only needed to remember that she had woken up. She was alive, she still had a future. And after the first door, there were still other doors waiting for her to open with her own hand. She did not yet know how difficult that would be. On the morning after the surgery, the only thing Emily truly understood was that her body needed time. Every time she tried to sit up a little faster, a dull ache reminded her that surviving did not mean becoming strong immediately. Recovery did not arrive like a shining victory. It came in small sips of water, in slow breaths, in each minute of accepting that today she could only do less than she had imagined yesterday. Martha Wells stepped into the room with a tray of medication and the patient eyes of someone who never rushed a patient ahead of their own body. "Miss Carter," she said, "today you only need to sit up for a little while. You do not have to prove anything to anyone." Emily smiled faintly. "Everyone keeps telling me that today." From the bed beside the window, Nathan Reed did not look up from his book. "Maybe because you need to hear it more than once." Emily turned to look at him. If Ryan had said it, the sentence would have sounded like criticism. With Nathan, it sounded like a truth placed gently on the table. No accusation, no shame. Only a reminder that she should stop treating herself like a machine expected to run on schedule. The days that followed moved with a slow rhythm. In the morning, Martha checked Emily's condition, wrote in the file, adjusted her blanket, and changed the water. At noon, hospital food arrived in small trays, bland but necessary. In the afternoon, the light from the window shifted from white to gray, then to pale blue as dusk fell over Briarwood. The red maple outside the courtyard remained there, losing a little more snow from its branches each day, but its final leaves still had not let go. Emily began noticing the smallest things. The way Nathan folded the corner of a page instead of bending the spine of his book. The way he always kept his glass of water on his right side, but moved it to the left when Martha entered so she would have room for the tray. The way he thanked everyone, from the doctor to the cleaning staff, in the same calm voice. A person with real power often revealed it in places where there was no need to show off. Emily had lived with a man who always wanted people to know what he had done, what he had bought, what he owned. Nathan seemed to do the opposite. He hid most of his life behind silence, as if reputation and money were only a coat hanging by the door, not the soul of a person. On the third day after surgery, Emily was allowed to sit up longer in bed. She was still tired, but her mind was clearer. Martha pulled the curtain so the light would be softer, then left the room. A comfortable quiet remained. Nathan set his book down. "You are thinking about the library." Emily was surprised. "How do you know?" "Because when you think about something sad, you look at the ceiling. When you think about the library, you look out the window." Emily laughed very softly, then immediately placed a hand on her abdomen by reflex. "Do not make me laugh. I am only observing. You observe a little too much. Professional habit." The sentence made Emily look at him for longer. Professional habit. Nathan Reed was not merely a quiet patient. He was a man who had once run companies, who had made decisions in rooms where a single sentence could change the fate of many people. But here, he used that ability to observe when an unfamiliar woman was missing her library. She told him more, not because she wanted to fill the silence, but because for the first time in a long while, someone was truly listening.
She told him about Oliver, the boy who used to clutch a book as if it were something dangerous. She told him about the day Oliver read 3 pages of a story and the whole reading room seemed to brighten. She told him about Sophie, the girl whose hair was always tied a little crooked, who often asked questions too large for a child. Why good people had to endure for so long. Why adults said they loved someone but did not listen. Why female characters kept waiting for someone else to open the door. Nathan listened to every detail. He did not ask just to be polite. He asked what kind of adventure stories Oliver liked. He asked how old Sophie was. He asked whether the library's reading program had stable funding. When Emily said no, that every year they had to make do somehow, he stayed silent longer than usual. Making do is a skill, he said. But if something important has to keep making do forever, it means the system behind it has a problem. Emily looked at him. You sound like you are evaluating an investment project. Maybe I'm trying not to sound that way. I am not your project, Mr. Reed. Nathan looked at her. For the first time that day, his calm expression softened clearly. I know. That is why I have not offered anything. Emily was silent. His answer made her feel respected. Ryan often made decisions and called them help. Nathan saw the problem, but he did not step across her boundary. Perhaps that was the difference between control and support. One took away the choice. The other left the choice in the hands of the person who needed it. That evening, when the footsteps in the hallway had quieted, Emily asked the question she had been holding since Martha mentioned Reed Holdings. Why did you choose to stay here? With your resources, surely you could have gone somewhere more private. Nathan was looking out the window. The question did not surprise him. Perhaps he had known it would come. Dr. Haynes is someone I trust, he said. He used to work at larger hospitals, then left. I came here because of his skill, not because of this building. And the private room? There were none available. You could have waited. I could have. Then why did you not wait? Nathan was silent. This time the silence was not avoidance. It was like a person choosing how to set down the truth without breaking it. I do not like being alone in hospitals, he said. The answer was so simple that Emily did not know how to respond. Nathan continued, his voice still even but lower. Some places remind you of things you tried to arrange neatly in the past. Hotels are empty. Home is too quiet. In a shared room, at least you know someone else is breathing nearby. Emily looked at him. Outside the window, the red maple stood motionless. The room suddenly felt deeper. You lost someone in a hospital, she said. Not a question, a very soft recognition. Nathan did not answer at once. Then he nodded. My wife, Claire. He spoke her name with the care of someone lifting an old object out of a box. Emily did not move. She was afraid even one strong breath might make him close up again. She made pottery, Nathan said. The bowls she made were never exactly the same. One would tilt slightly, another would have uneven glaze. I used to tease her that if she put them into production, the quality control department would make her miserable. She said the uneven places were what gave them a soul. Emily imagined a woman with clay on her hands, smiling at imperfect things. We were waiting for a child, Nathan continued. Then something happened. Very quickly, too quickly. After that, my house became so quiet that I started working more, just so I would not have to hear it. He did not explain the details. He did not need to. The story was heavy enough without images that hurt too sharply. It hurt because of the emptiness, because of a name kept for years, because of a man who had everything, but could not keep what he loved most. Emily did not say, I am sorry. The sentence was true, but too thin. She only slowly reached her hand across the space between the two beds. The movement caused a small ache in her body, but she still reached out. Nathan looked at her hand. Then he placed his own in it, only for a few seconds. There was no promise, no drama, nothing that could be mistaken for rushing. It was simply one human being touching another to say, "I heard your pain." Nathan lowered his eyes to their hands. Inside him, a door that had been closed for 12 years opened a narrow crack. Not enough for light to flood in, but enough to remind him that light still existed. On Friday morning, Dr. Haynes came to check on Emily and said she could be discharged if she continued to rest according to his instructions. Nathan was also cleared to leave that same day. His procedure had stabilized. They both received the news with different reactions. Emily felt her heart sink because she knew she was about to return to the townhouse Ryan had left behind. Nathan saw it, even though she said nothing. "How are you getting home?" he asked. "I will call a car. You should not carry your own things." "My bag is light." Nathan looked at the small cloth bag, then at her. "Miss Carter, of all the arguments you could use, that is the weakest one." Emily almost laughed. Then she looked tiredly out the window. The red maple had lost some of its snow. The last leaves were still there. She thought of the house, the empty coat hook, the drawer of papers, the possibility that Ryan had taken more than she imagined. "All right," she finally said. "You can take me home." Nathan nodded, as if there had been no more reasonable choice from the beginning. Before leaving the room, Emily looked back one last time. 2 beds, the crack in the ceiling, the red maple outside the window. This place had witnessed her fear, her collapse, her awakening, and the beginning of her seeing more clearly. She had entered it as someone left behind. She was leaving still sore, still weak, but no longer as empty as before. Nathan picked up her cloth bag. A man who could own large buildings was carrying an old, small bag for her. Emily looked at the scene and understood one more thing. Real power was not making other people bow their heads. Sometimes, real power was knowing how to bend down, pick up a bag, open a door, and let a person in recovery still feel respected. Emily thought about that as Nathan walked beside her through the hospital corridor, holding her old brown cloth bag as if it carried something precious that needed to be handled with care. He did not walk too fast. He did not ask whether she was all right every few steps. He did not turn her temporary weakness into a reason to control her. He simply kept a pace steady enough for her to walk at her own speed. St. Helena Hospital in the morning had a clean, slightly sorrowful light. People in thick coats stood waiting near the elevator. An elderly man sat in a chair, holding a small bouquet of flowers. A young woman spoke very softly on the phone, as if one word too loud might cause the worry in her voice to break open. Emily looked at all of it, and felt as though she both belonged to this place and was leaving it behind. She had walked in with fear, with a small bag, with a note Ryan had left on the kitchen table. She was leaving with tiredness in her body, a paper envelope still safely hidden at the bottom of her bag, and a stranger who no longer felt entirely like a stranger. Nathan's car was parked in the patient discharge area. It was a black car, elegant in a quiet way. Not flashy, not showy, but its solid lines alone made it clear that its owner was not someone who needed to prove he had money. Nathan opened the door for Emily, waited until she had settled in carefully, then placed her bag on the back seat. It was a small gesture, but Emily could feel the patience in every second of it. Briarwood, after the first snow, looked like a town covered with a white sheet of paper. Low rooftops rested beneath a thin layer of snow. Mrs. Nora's bakery glowed with yellow light. The community library passed by outside the car window, the winter reading program poster still hanging on the door. Emily watched it until the car turned onto another street. Part of her wanted to ask Nathan to stop, She wanted to walk into the library, sit among the familiar shelves and tell Oliver, Sophie, and all the children that she was still here. But her body needed rest. And there was another door she had to open first. The townhouse on Alder Street appeared beyond the bare trees. 3 stories of brown brick, old stone steps, the living room window where she used to place a small lavender pot every spring. Emily looked at the house for a long time before opening the car door. She had lived there for 8 years, paid for it, cleaned it, repaired it, tried to turn it into a home. But that morning it no longer welcomed her like a home. It felt like a silent witness to everything she had endured for far too long. Nathan carried her bag up the stairs. Emily moved slowly, one hand on the railing. Those 3 flights of stairs had never felt so long. Every step reminded her that recovery was not a beautiful story completed in a single day. It was the body's quiet work, the act of accepting slowness without blaming herself for it. At the door, Emily took out her key. Her hand paused for a beat before the lock. Nathan stood behind her. "If you want me to wait out here, I will," he said. Emily turned to look at him. That offer moved her even more than the fact that he was carrying her bag. Ryan had always stepped into every private corner of her life as if it were his right. Nathan stood outside her own door and asked, without saying the words, whether she would allow him in. "Just help me bring the bag inside," she said softly. The door opened. The smell of emptiness came out first. It was not the smell of dust, nor the damp smell of a closed house. It was a harder scent to name, the scent of a place where someone had just taken away familiar things. Ryan's large armchair was still in the living room beside the window. It sat there, heavy and confident, as if its owner had only stepped away for a moment. But the standing lamp beside it was gone. Ryan's coat was no longer on the hook. The photograph of him fishing by the lake, the one that had once hung on the wall, was gone too, leaving only a pale rectangle on the paint. In the kitchen, the black mug Ryan used every morning had disappeared from the lower shelf. One drawer had been pulled out of alignment. A few stacks of papers were no longer where they belonged. Emily stood in the middle of the living room, stunned into stillness. She had thought she would cry. But no. Enough tears had fallen at the hospital. Now, inside this house, she felt only a cold, clean clarity. Ryan had not only taken things. He had searched. He had opened drawers. He had wanted something more than coats and coffee mugs. Nathan saw the drawer, too. He was looking for documents, he said. It was not a question. Emily walked to the table and opened the drawer wider. A few old bills had been turned over. The insurance folder sat crooked. The things Ryan had been looking for were not there. She had moved the important copies into the envelope in her bag. Another set was inside the tin box at her mother's house. Suddenly, her heart felt steadier. "He will not find them," Emily said. "Not here." Nathan looked at her. This time his eyes were not only gentle, they held clear recognition. A man used to assessing risk had seen what Ryan had not seen in 8 years. Emily had not only endured, she had remembered. She had prepared. She had protected her part of the truth in silence. "You prepared better than he thought," Nathan said. Emily touched the edge of the table. "He always thought I understood nothing." People who want control often like to believe that. The sentence was not harsh, but it was sharp. Emily looked at Nathan and realized he understood this not only through compassion. He understood it through the experience of someone who had met many forms of false power, people who spoke loudly to hide the uncertainty inside them. Nathan set the bag down beside the sofa and went into the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator, looked inside, then closed it. "You have nothing to eat." "I will call Grace later," Emily said. "You need to eat before thinking about anything larger. I do not want to trouble you any more." Nathan turned back. His voice remained calm. "I am talking about lunch, not a lifelong contract." Emily looked at him, then unexpectedly gave a very small laugh. The laugh tugged lightly at her abdomen, forcing her to stop. But it was still a laugh. A small sound inside a house that had just had all its warmth pulled out of it. Nathan went to buy groceries without asking too many questions. Before leaving, he only said he would be back soon. Emily sat down on the sofa and looked at Ryan's armchair. There had been a time when that chair made her feel as if she had no place in her own living room. Now, she only saw it as a heavy object that needed to be removed once she had the strength to call someone. 40 minutes later, Nathan returned with 2 paper bags. He had bought chicken, vegetables, soft bread, yogurt, herbal tea, and a few simple things that followed the eating guidelines after discharge. Nothing luxurious. No expensive gift. Just the things a person needed to get through the first day home. He washed his hands, took out a pot, and began making soup in Emily's kitchen. The sight left her silent. Nathan Reed, the man Martha had said owned buildings, projects, and boardrooms full of people waiting for him to speak, was slicing carrots on her old cutting board. He did it without awkwardness, and not as if he were performing kindness. He did it as if caring for someone who needed to recover was the most ordinary thing in the world. The scent of broth slowly spread through the house. Warm, gentle, real. Emily turned her face toward the window to hide the tear that had just slipped down. This time she was not crying because of Ryan. She was crying because of a bowl of soup that had not even finished cooking. Because after years of doing everything herself, someone had looked into an empty refrigerator and had not told her to figure it out on her own. He had simply gone to buy food. Nathan did not turn around right away. He gave her that small pocket of privacy. When the bowl of soup was placed on the table, Emily held the spoon with both hands. "Thank you." "Eat while it is still hot," Nathan said. No beautiful words, no turning it into a debt. Just a bowl of soup and a steady presence. That night, Nathan did not stay. He said he had rented a room downtown and would come by in the morning if she agreed. Emily wanted to say it was not necessary, but the house behind her was still too quiet, and for the first time she was honest enough not to pretend she needed no one. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow morning." Nathan nodded, then left. Emily closed the door and leaned her back against the cold wood. In the living room, Ryan's armchair was still there. The drawer was still disturbed. The divorce was still ahead. But on the table sat a half-finished bowl of soup. In her bag was the paper envelope, and inside her there was a space that had just been returned to her. That space was no longer only loss. It was beginning to feel like a place where something new could be planted. But before anything new could begin to grow, old roots often tried to cling one last time. The next morning, Emily woke up on the sofa in the living room. She had meant to go into the bedroom, but her body had been more tired than she expected. The night before, after Nathan left, she had only had enough strength to clear the soup bowl, take her medication as instructed, and sit down for a moment. That moment had stretched into the entire night. When she opened her eyes, winter light had spread a pale gray across the wall. Ryan's armchair was still sitting in the middle of the living room, large, silent, like an old stone she did not yet have the strength to move. The house was quiet. There was no sound of Ryan opening a cabinet, no sound of him making phone calls in the kitchen, no sound of him complaining because the coffee had gone cold. At first, the silence made Emily feel hollow in the chest. Then she realized that inside that emptiness, the familiar tension was gone. There was no longer a need to guess someone else's mood before allowing herself to breathe. No longer a need to choose every word carefully to keep breakfast from becoming uncomfortable. There was only her, the dull ache, the leftover soup in the refrigerator, and the paper envelope inside the cloth bag beside the sofa. Emily sat up very slowly. Her body protested with a light sting, making her place one hand over her abdomen and breathe out little by little. Dr. Haynes had been clear. She needed rest. She needed to avoid strain. She needed to give her body time. In the past, Emily often treated every instruction meant for her as something negotiable. If the housework needed doing, she did it. If the library was short-staffed, she went in. If Ryan said he was busy, she handled things herself. But today she did not want to betray her own body anymore. The doorbell rang before the morning had fully brightened. Emily knew it was Nathan. He stood outside the door with 2 paper cups of coffee and a small bag of groceries. A few flakes of snow still clung to his dark coat. He did not step inside right away. He waited for her to move aside, as if the door belonged to her, and he could only enter if she allowed it. "Did you sleep?" Nathan asked. "A little." He looked at the sofa, then at her. "A little on the sofa." Emily was about to say she was fine, but the words reached her mouth and stopped. She did not want to keep playing the role of someone who was always fine. "I'm more tired than I thought," she said. Nathan nodded. "Then nothing big today. Breakfast, medicine, call the lawyer if you are ready. That is all." Emily watched him walk into the kitchen, set down the coffee, open the refrigerator, and take out the soup to warm it. Every movement was calm. He did not take over the space. He did not give orders. He did not make the house feel like it belonged to him just because he was helping. That made Emily feel both grateful and cautious. 8 years with Ryan had taught her that help could become a debt if the hand offering it intended to use it later. Nathan did not seem like that. But fear did not disappear just because a good person appeared. "You don't have to come every day," Emily said when he placed the bowl of soup in front of her. "I know." "Then why do you still come?" Nathan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, placing her coffee near her right hand. "Because you should not be buying groceries by yourself yet. Because this house still has many things that need to be sorted out. And because I know what it feels like when a familiar place suddenly becomes too quiet." The last sentence was not loud, but it made Emily fall silent. She remembered Claire, the wife Nathan had mentioned in the hospital. She remembered how he had said his own house had become so quiet after loss that he worked just so he would not have to hear it. Some of Nathan's sentences were not meant to please her. They were simply pieces of truth he placed between them, just enough for her to know he was not speaking from outside pain. Emily's phone rang when she had only eaten a few spoonfuls. Ryan's name appeared on the screen. The air in the kitchen slowed. Nathan saw it, but he did not ask whether she wanted to answer. He only wrapped one hand around his coffee cup and waited. The decision belonged to her. Emily let the phone ring 2 more times. Then she answered. "Emily." Ryan's voice came through, softer than she expected. "I think we should talk calmly." She looked out the window. The snow on the sill was melting into small streaks of water. "What do you want to talk about?" "I won't drag this out. My lawyer has prepared the papers. If you sign to give up your ownership share of the townhouse, everything will be simpler. I made the original down payment. You know that." Emily set down her spoon. "I also know we paid the mortgage together for 8 years. I have the full payment records." Silence fell on the other end. Nathan lifted his eyes very slightly. Ryan gave a small laugh, but this time, the laugh did not sound as confident as before. "You just had surgery, Emily. I don't think you should be stressing yourself with paperwork right now. Maybe you are being affected by emotion, or by the new people around you." The new people around her.
Emily understood immediately that he meant Nathan. She felt a coldness move down her back, but it no longer made her shrink. Instead, it made her mind sharper. Ryan did not only want the house. He wanted to define her condition for her. He wanted to turn recovery into weakness. He wanted to turn the person helping her into someone manipulating her. He wanted to turn every decision she made into something that could be questioned. "Are you saying I am not clear-headed enough to make my own decisions?" Emily asked. "I'm not saying that. I'm only saying that if this goes any further, a lawyer may raise questions."
You have just gone through an important medical procedure. You are spending time around a man who is almost a stranger. How do you think that will look to other people? Emily looked at Nathan. He did not react strongly, but his jaw tightened very slightly. His usually calm eyes became sharper. In that moment, Emily saw another side of Nathan Reed. Not the man who had made soup in her kitchen, not the patient reading beside the window, but the man who had once sat in meetings where one wrong sentence could change an entire contract. "Ryan," she said slowly, "from now on, I will not sign any papers unless my own lawyer reviews them first." "Your own lawyer?" Ryan replied, his voice turning harder. "And how exactly are you going to pay for that?" "That is not your concern." "Emily, don't make this ugly." For 8 years, "Don't make this ugly" had silenced her many times. Don't ask in front of my friends. Don't talk about money when I'm tired. Don't bring up children when I'm under pressure. Don't make this house tense. Don't put me in an awkward position. This time, that sentence could no longer lock her throat. "I will handle this properly," she said, "through a lawyer." Then she ended the call. She did not throw the phone. She did not cry. She did not tremble. She only placed it on the table. Silence stretched for a few seconds. The pot of soup on the stove made a soft bubbling sound. Outside, a car passed by, splashing melted snow against the curb. Nathan spoke first. "He is trying to build a story." Emily nodded. "That I am not clear-headed?" "That you are easy to influence," Nathan said. "That you should not be making decisions about property on your own. That if you refuse to sign, it is not really your choice, but because someone else is affecting you." Emily looked at her hands on the table. They were thinner than before, a little pale, but they were still the hands that had kept library records, written funding applications, signed bank transfers, and placed every receipt exactly where it belonged. "I need a lawyer," she said. "You need a good lawyer." "Good lawyers are expensive." "Yes." Nathan's direct answer made Emily look at him. She knew what was coming, and her defensive instinct rose immediately. "I can't let you pay for me." "I have not offered." "But you will." Nathan was silent for a second. Then he set down his cup. "I can give you a name. Arthur Bennett. He understands property disputes and legal maneuvers like this. You call him yourself. You hire him yourself. You decide for yourself. I will not do it for you." Emily kept looking at him. "And if I cannot afford him?" "Then you ask him about payment options. Do not ask me first. If after that you still need help, you will decide for yourself whether to tell me." The way he said it left Emily with no easy argument. Nathan did not push money toward her. He did not take the wheel. He did not turn her into someone who owed him. He simply placed a door in front of her and left it for her to open. Emily stood up very slowly and went to the cloth bag beside the sofa. She took out the paper envelope and placed it on the table. Nathan did not touch it until she opened it herself. Inside were copies, arranged neatly by group. The townhouse mortgage, repair costs, bank statements, bills for the cabin by the lake. Each sheet of paper was a day when Emily had been treated as if she understood nothing, while silently carrying part of the life Ryan claimed as his own in front of others. Nathan looked at the stack of papers. "You have been preparing for a long time." "I didn't know who I was preparing to stand against," Emily said. "I only knew that one day I might need to prove I had been present in this life too." Nathan looked at her with deeper eyes than before. "Ryan underestimated you." Emily closed the envelope. "He was not the only one." The sentence was not bitter. It was calm. And because it was calm, it was stronger. That afternoon, Emily called Arthur Bennett herself. His voice on the other end was slow, clear, and professional. He asked her for a few details, listened to her summary, then agreed to meet her at home because she was still recovering. Emily knew Nathan had probably opened some door quietly through his reputation, but he did not take credit for it. He only stood at the sink, washing 2 coffee cups, as if that were the most important task in the room. When the call ended, Emily set the phone down. She was tired. Her body needed rest, but inside her some part had just straightened. Ryan thought she would sign because she was afraid. Ryan thought she would stay silent because she was tired. Ryan thought she did not understand documents, rights, or herself. But Ryan had forgotten one thing. A librarian knew how to preserve the truth, and when necessary, she knew exactly which shelf to take it from. That thought stayed with Emily for the rest of the afternoon, like a small lamp placed inside a room whose lights had just gone out. She was still tired. Her body still reminded her to move slowly, to sit down carefully, not to reach too far, not to try to become healthy just because her pride wanted her to. But beneath that exhaustion, a new source of strength was waking up. Not loud, not hot with anger, just clear. Arthur Bennett arrived the next day. He was not the kind of lawyer Emily had imagined from movies. He did not speak quickly, did not carry an icy sharpness, did not make the room feel smaller with his presence. He was a man in his 50s, solidly built, with graying hair, a thick charcoal coat, and an old leather briefcase that had been carefully maintained. But his eyes were different. They observed quickly, precisely, and missed no detail. When he stepped into the living room, Arthur looked at Ryan's armchair, the disturbed drawer of papers, the brown cloth bag beside the sofa, then looked at Emily. He did not look at her like a weak patient. He looked at her like someone holding the most important part of the case. "Miss Carter," he said, "I have heard the summary, but now I want to hear it from you. One thing at a time. You do not need to make the story prettier. You only need to make it accurate." That sentence made it easier for Emily to breathe. She had lived too long with someone who always wanted her to tell everything in a way that benefited him. This time, she was allowed to tell the truth without dressing it up. She told him how Ryan had left the house on the morning she was admitted. She told him about the note on the kitchen table. She told him about the message ending their marriage before her surgery. She told him how the house had been searched for documents. She told him about the call demanding that she give up her ownership share of the townhouse. She even told him about the way Ryan had implied that her recovery could be used to question her ability to make decisions for herself. Arthur did not interrupt much. He only occasionally asked for dates, the names of people who had been present, whether the message was still saved, which doctor had treated her, what medications she had been given after discharge, and whether Ryan had a key to the house. Nathan sat near the window at the edge of the chair, silent. He did not speak for Emily. He did not correct her words. He did not add his own emotions to her story. That too was a kind of respect.
When Emily opened the paper envelope and spread the copies across the table, Arthur stopped writing. You arranged them chronologically?
Yes.
The loan, repair costs, bills for the cabin by the lake, all with copies?
Yes.
Arthur looked at her for a little longer. In his eyes there was a brief flash of very professional satisfaction, like a long-time craftsman seeing a tool prepared exactly as it should be. Your husband underestimated you, he said.
Emily answered softly. Many people still do.
Arthur nodded and did not ask more. Perhaps he had seen enough women called too gentle, too emotional, too uninformed, until they placed a complete stack of documents on the table and made every assumption collapse. As for the property, your position is quite strong, Arthur said. If these documents are accurate and can be verified, you have a clear foundation. Ryan's initial down payment can be considered, but that does not mean he has the right to take everything. What concerns me more is the direction he is trying to use.
My ability to make decisions for myself,
Emily said. Yes. They may try to build a story that you are weak, easily influenced, and that someone else is affecting you. A story like that is not the truth, but if it is not stopped early, it can make everything more complicated. Nathan lifted his eyes. They will use me. Arthur looked at him. For the first time, the two men faced each other directly in the conversation. Possibly. And because you are Nathan Reed, they may try even harder to use it. A wealthy man appearing right after her surgery, helping her, taking her home, staying close to her. If the other side wants to tell the story incorrectly, they will have material. The room fell silent. Emily heard every word. Not because she doubted Nathan, but because she understood that the world could twist truth into another shape. A bowl of soup could be called manipulation. A hand that did not force could be turned into a shadow of control. A woman who chose for herself could be described as someone being led.
What do I need to do?
She asked. Arthur closed his pen. From now on, do not communicate directly with Ryan unless necessary. All documents go through me. I will request a professional statement from Dr. Haynes confirming that you are clear-headed, recovering normally, and capable of understanding personal decisions. We also need a witness from the hospital, someone who observed you after surgery.
Martha Wells,
Emily said immediately. Good. I will contact her. Arthur looked around the townhouse. One more practical matter. You should not stay alone in a place Ryan can easily access, especially while you are still recovering. I am not saying this to frighten you. I am saying it because your stability matters right now. Emily knew where that sentence was leading before Nathan spoke. You can stay at my apartment for a while, Nathan said. Your own room, your own key. No other conditions. Emily looked at him. Inside her, an old movement happened at once, like a small animal curling inward at the sound of a door slamming. Accepting help. Owing someone. Being controlled. Losing power. Nathan saw all of it on her face. I am not asking you to trust me immediately, he said slowly. I am only offering an option. You can refuse. You can stay with Grace. You can ask your mother. But you should not stay here alone for the next few days.
Arthur did not add emotion to the advice. Practically speaking, it is reasonable.
Emily looked at Ryan's armchair, looked at the drawer of papers, looked at the room she had tried to call home for 8 years. She realized the fear was not leaving. The real fear was staying only because she was used to enduring. I want to bring my lavender pot, she said. Nathan nodded. Of course. The lavender pot sat on the bedroom windowsill, tilted slightly toward the light. Ryan had once said it took up space. Emily had kept it through many seasons anyway, even when the plant had almost withered. When Nathan carried the pot down the stairs, he held it with both hands, carefully, as if he were carrying something with memories. Emily walked behind him, slowly, and for the first time,
She did not feel as if she were leaving home empty-handed.
Nathan's apartment was on the second floor of an old building near downtown Briarwood. The staircase was wide, with a dark wooden railing and tall windows overlooking Main Street. Inside, the apartment was spacious and quiet. Books were everywhere, not the kind bought for decoration. Some lay face down on tables, some were filled with paper markers, some had spines faded from being read many times. Everything was neat, expensive, but not showy. Still, the apartment was missing something very clear. It was missing life. Nathan showed her the room meant for her. A clean bed, an empty wardrobe, a small desk beside the window. No unnecessary decoration, no intrusion. A room prepared for someone who needed a place to stay, but not yet touched by familiarity. Emily placed the lavender pot on the windowsill. "Is this all right?" she asked. Nathan looked at the plant, then at the room. "Yes. It makes this place look less like somewhere I only stop by to sleep." That sentence helped Emily understand his loneliness a little more. Some people had many houses, but nowhere that was truly home. Nathan was probably one of them. The first days in Nathan's apartment were built out of small things. He woke early and worked in his private office. Emily did not know that, so on the first morning she knocked on the door to ask where the coffee was. When the door opened, Nathan looked at her with the expression of someone who had just been pulled up from a very deep thought. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "It is all right. I am just a little slow coming back to real life." He said it so honestly that Emily did not know whether to laugh or feel sad. From the next morning on, she did not knock before 7:30. She sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee, looking at the lavender by the window and watching Main Street wake below. At exactly 7:30, Nathan stepped out. No one made an agreement, but their shared breakfast began that way. Emily had a habit of thinking aloud when she read documents. She murmured about dates, invoices, and details that needed checking. At first, Nathan thought she was speaking to him.
After a few times, he understood. Then he began answering at the right moments, briefly and usefully. If this invoice is missing the repair company's name, Arthur will need an additional confirmation. Emily looked at him. "I was talking to myself." "I know, but yourself just raised an important point." She laughed softly. The apartment slowly became less cold. A week later, Arthur called. His voice was calm, but the content was not light. "Ryan and the nurse, Tessa Blake, have filed a request to review your temporary decision-making capacity during the period after surgery. Tessa claims you showed signs of being easily influenced and making hasty personal decisions." Emily stood in the kitchen, the phone in her hand. The lavender on the windowsill trembled slightly in the warmth from the heater. "They are using Nathan," she said. "Yes," Arthur replied. "They are using his appearance in your life to build the story." After the call ended, Emily placed the phone down. Nathan stood at the kitchen doorway, silent. There was no panic in his eyes, only cold, deep focus. "They want to take my voice away from me," Emily said. Nathan answered, "Then we will let the truth speak louder than they do." That evening, the doorbell rang. Ryan stood outside with Tessa Blake. He wore a neat coat, his smile prepared in advance. Tessa stood beside him, her eyes drifting away, her confidence not entirely secure. Emily did not step back. "What do you want?" she asked. Ryan looked around the apartment, his expression tightening for a moment when he recognized the quiet luxury of the place. "I only want to talk like civilized adults. Sign the agreement about the townhouse and I will withdraw the request. Everything will be easier for everyone." Emily looked at the man who had once made her choose silence to keep peace. Now his voice was still the same, soft, reasonable, wrapped in a thin layer of politeness. But it no longer had power over her.
"From now on, everything goes through my lawyer," she said. "Please leave." Ryan froze. "Emily." She looked straight at him. "Leave." Tessa lightly pulled Ryan's arm. Perhaps she had seen what Ryan did not want to see yet. The woman standing before them was no longer someone who would lower her head because of a familiar voice. The door closed behind them. Emily stood still, her heart beating fast, but she was not as afraid as she had expected. Nathan stood behind her, close enough for her to know he was there, far enough for the moment to remain hers. That night, close to 3 a.m, Emily went to the kitchen and found Nathan sitting at the table with a cold cup of tea. He was not surprised to see her. "You have never tried to hold my hand," Emily said softly. "Not even when I cried. Not even when I was afraid." Nathan looked at her. "I did not want you to think I was taking advantage of you while you were weak." "And what if I say I want you to hold my hand now?"
The kitchen sank into silence. Outside, Main Street slept under a thin layer of snow. Nathan slowly placed his hand on the table, palm open. He did not pull her closer. He did not ask for anything. He simply left it there. Emily placed her hand on his. There were no vows, no kiss, nothing rushed. Only 2 hands on a kitchen table, between a long winter and a life beginning to change its skin. This time, Emily was not saved by anyone. She chose where to place her own hand. And because it was her choice, Emily did not pull her hand away immediately. Nathan's kitchen was quiet, with only the steady hum of the heater inside the walls and the dim light from the snow-covered street outside. His hand was warm, steady, but it did not tighten around hers. Nathan kept his hand open, like an unlocked door, and Emily understood that if she wanted to stand up and leave, he would not stop her. That made her stay longer. For 8 years, Emily had grown used to choices wrapped in pressure. Ryan rarely said, "You have to do this," but he arranged things in a way that made her feel that if she refused, she would become the one causing trouble. Nathan was different. He did not push her toward him. He only sat there in silence, letting her realize on her own that peace could also be a place worth trusting. The next morning, Emily woke early. She had not slept much, but her mind was unusually clear. When Nathan stepped out of his office at 7:30, she was already sitting at the kitchen table. In front of her were a cup of coffee, the paper envelope, a notebook, and the lavender pot on the windowsill. The small purple blossoms leaned gently toward the winter light. Nathan stopped. "Are you preparing for the meeting with Arthur?" "Partly," Emily said. "There is something else." He pulled out the chair and sat across from her. "I want to file a marriage application," she said. The sentence was not loud, but the kitchen seemed to fall silent for one beat. Nathan looked at her for a long time. If he had been someone else, perhaps he would have asked why so quickly, whether she was certain, whether this was because of Ryan. But Nathan had learned that the wrong question could wound the right decision. He only looked at Emily, searching her eyes for panic, impulse, or fear. He did not find those things. He saw exhaustion. He saw hurt. But he also saw clarity. "Are you sure this is what you want, and not something you want to use against them?" Nathan asked. Emily looked down at her hands. The hand that had trembled while holding Ryan's message. The hand that had hidden the paper envelope at the bottom of her bag. The hand that had placed itself on Nathan's the night before. "If I do this because of Ryan, then the story still belongs to him," she said. "But I do not want that anymore. I want to do this because of me, because when I am with you, I do not feel smaller." Nathan was silent. A very quiet emotion passed across his face, so quickly that someone less observant would have missed it. Emily did not miss it. "Then today we go," he said. The county registration office stood inside an old building near the square. Snow melted on the stone steps in thin streaks of water. Emily walked slowly, not because she was weak, but because she had begun to respect her body more. Nathan walked beside her, not holding her hand on the street, but always close enough that if she stopped, he would stop too. Inside the office, there was the smell of old paper, fresh paint, and damp wool. The clerk behind the counter checked their documents and asked the necessary questions in a polite voice. Emily answered each one clearly: name, date of birth, address, legal status still pending completion. Nathan answered his part, short and precise. The clerk checked the calendar, then said the earliest available date was January 26th at 11 in the morning. Emily looked at Nathan. He nodded. "That date works," Emily said. The stamp came down on the paper with a small, dry sound. There was nothing dazzling, no music, no flowers. But Emily felt something settle into the right place. Not because marriage would save her, not because Nathan would solve her life, but because for the first time she was stepping into a commitment not through endurance, but through choice. When they stepped outside, cold wind swept across the street. On the corner, a man selling roasted chestnuts stood beside a small cart, white steam rising into the gray morning. Nathan stopped and bought 2 paper bags. He handed one to Emily. She held the warm bag of chestnuts and felt the heat spread through her fingertips, then suddenly laughed. Nathan looked at her. "What is it?" "We just registered our wedding date, while my former husband is trying to prove I am not clear-headed enough to decide for myself," she said. "And now we are standing here eating chestnuts, like 2 people who have nothing complicated going on in their lives." Nathan watched her laugh. It was not a loud laugh, but it was real. Very real. In his eyes, something softened. "It has been a long time since I heard that laugh," he said. "What laugh?" "Yours." Emily fell silent. In the cold wind, that sentence was warmer than the bag of chestnuts in her hands. That afternoon, Martha Wells called. Her voice was low and serious. "Emily, I need to meet you. There is something I think you should know. It is not convenient to say over the phone." They met at the small cafe near the library, where the wooden chairs always creaked softly when someone sat down. Nathan did not come with her. Emily wanted to meet Martha on her own, and he did not ask again. Martha arrived in a gray coat, her face tired but calm. She placed her handbag on her lap and folded her hands together. For a long moment she did not speak. Emily did not push her. At last, Martha took out an old phone. "I have a recording," she said. "I did not mean to record it. That day I turned on the recorder to remind myself of something after my shift, and forgot to turn it off. I was standing in the hallway and I heard Ryan speaking with Tessa Blake." Emily felt her heart grow cold, but she remained still. Martha played the recording. At first there were only hospital hallway sounds, footsteps, the distant wheels of a cart. Then Ryan's voice appeared, low but clear. "Are you sure this can be used?" Tessa's voice answered quickly. "I am a nurse. If I say she was easily influenced after surgery, they will have to consider it. She just had surgery. Then she let a man she barely knew take care of her. And now there's the marriage registration too. People will ask questions." Ryan continued. "As long as I get the townhouse and the cabin by the lake, everything else can be dealt with later." The recording was not long. There was no shouting, no overly harsh language. It was the calmness in their voices that hurt Emily most. They had spoken about her life as if it were a file that needed organizing. They intended to turn her recovery period into a reason to take away her voice. Martha turned off the phone.
I thought about it for a very long time, she said. I do not want to interfere in anyone's private matters, but this is no longer only private. If someone in healthcare says something false about a patient's condition, it can harm an innocent person. I could not stay silent. Emily looked at her. In Martha's eyes was the exhaustion of someone who knew that doing the right thing was not always comfortable. Thank you, Emily said. Martha shook her head. Do not thank me. Just let the truth be said in the right place. Arthur Bennett listened to the recording that same evening at Nathan's apartment. He put on headphones, listened once, then listened again. When he took the headphones off, he did not smile and did not look triumphant. He only placed the phone down very carefully. This is important, he said. We will submit it through the proper process. Martha can confirm the circumstances of the recording. Dr. Haynes has already provided a report about your recovery condition. If everything is verified, it will be very difficult for them to continue the story that you were not clear-headed. Emily sat still. So, is this over? Arthur looked at her. Not immediately, but the balance has shifted. The balance had shifted. That sentence followed Emily through the days that came next. At first, Tessa denied the meaning of the conversation and said everything had been misunderstood. But when Martha agreed to testify and the information was compared, Tessa's statement could no longer stand firmly. The request to review Emily's decision-making capacity was withdrawn. There was no loud scene, no dazzling victory, only documents being sent, meetings handled according to procedure, and each piece of truth being placed where it belonged. The property division hearing took place on a late January morning. The courtroom was small, with tall windows looking out over a courtyard covered in gray snow. Ryan sat on the opposite side with a new lawyer. He wore a neatly tailored suit, but his face was tighter than before. Tessa was not there. The empty chair beside Ryan told Emily many things that no one needed to explain. Arthur presented the file clearly. Bank statements, repair receipts, payment history, income confirmation from the library, Dr. Haynes's report, Martha's statement. Each document was placed down, not for revenge, but to rebuild the truth in its correct shape. Ryan had once thought Emily was only a woman who kept books. Today, the papers she had kept spoke for her. The judge listened to both sides. There was no loud climax. No one was allowed to turn the courtroom into a place to pour out anger. Everything moved slowly, seriously, clearly. At last, the ruling was given. Emily would keep the townhouse and the cabin by the lake. Ryan would receive compensation corresponding to his initial contribution, nothing more. When Emily heard it, she only breathed out. One long, deep breath, as if 8 years had just left her chest. In the hallway, Ryan stood alone by the window. He looked at her, and in his eyes there was a confusion Emily had never seen before. Perhaps only then did he understand that the woman he had once underestimated was not powerless. She simply had not used her power yet. Emily stopped in front of him. "Goodbye, Ryan," she said. No anger, no bitterness, no need for another word. Then she turned away and walked toward Nathan, who was standing a few steps away. He did not move forward in her place. He waited for her to finish her own ending. Outside the courthouse, snow was still falling. But this time, when Emily stepped down the cold stone steps, she no longer felt as if she were leaving a battle. She felt as if she were returning to herself. It was not a return to the townhouse on Alder Street, nor a return to the years that had already passed. The place Emily was returning to was deeper, quieter, a place that had once been covered in the dust of endurance and fear. It was the part of her that knew she had value, knew she had a voice, knew that a person could be gentle and still be strong, could be wounded,
and still not lose the right to choose for herself. Thin snow fell over the courthouse steps. Nathan walked beside her slowly, not touching her hand right away. He let that moment belong to Emily. He understood that some victories did not need applause. Some doors, when they closed, made no loud sound, but inside a person they echoed like winter finally cracking open to make room for spring. When they got into the car, Emily looked through the window at the building behind them. Somewhere inside, Ryan still had to face the result of the choices he had made. She did not feel happy about that. She also did not hurt the way she once thought she would. Ryan's story was drifting out of her life, like a boat leaving a dock in the fog, growing smaller and smaller, becoming less and less connected to the place she would go next. Nathan started the car. "Are you all right?" he asked. Emily looked at her 2 hands resting on her lap. Those hands were still thin, still not fully strong, but they no longer trembled. "I think I am," she said. "Not all right as in everything has stopped hurting, but all right as in I know I will survive." Nathan nodded. He did not turn that sentence into something prettier. Because of that, it felt even more true. On January 26th at 11 in the morning, Emily and Nathan were married at the county registration office. The ceremony was so small that if someone passed by in the hallway, they might not have known that inside, a new beginning had just been placed down very gently. Emily wore a simple cream dress with a modest neckline and long sleeves, nothing elaborate. She did not want to prove to anyone that she was happy. She only wanted to feel like herself. Nathan wore a dark suit and a gray tie, looking as serious as if he were walking into the most important meeting of his life. But his eyes were softer than usual. Grace Miller stood as Emily's witness. Her best friend walked in wearing a red wool scarf, her eyes already wet, though she was still trying to look strong. "If you make me cry before the ceremony even starts, I will never forgive you," Grace whispered. Emily laughed. Arthur Bennett was there too. He stood straight, both hands placed in front of him, his expression calm as if he were still in a courtroom. But when Emily turned toward him, he gave a slight nod. The nod of someone who had seen her move from fear to calm, from being questioned to being heard. The woman officiating the ceremony was older, with a warm reading voice. She read the familiar words with simple respect, not exaggerating, not turning love into a stage.
Emily listened to every word, then looked at Nathan. She remembered the hospital room at St. Helena, the crack in the ceiling, the red maple outside the window, the glass of water he had placed beside her bed, and the word, "all right," that he had given, when she thought she had only spoken a desperate joke. When Nathan placed the ring on her finger, his hand trembled slightly. Emily saw it. He knew she saw it. After the ceremony, he looked at her for a long time and said softly, "Thank you for trusting me." Emily smiled. "Thank you for not turning kindness into another cage." Nathan was silent for one beat. Then he held her hand, this time without hesitation. After the wedding, there was no miracle that changed everything overnight. And that was what made Emily feel safe. The next morning still began with the sound of the coffee machine, winter light on the windowsill, the lavender pot leaning toward the window, and Nathan stepping out of his office at exactly 7:30. Only one thing was different. That apartment was no longer a place where she was staying temporarily. It had begun to become home. Emily returned to the library in mid-February, following her doctor's advice, doing only light tasks and resting whenever she needed to. When she opened the door to the children's reading room, the children went silent for 1 second, then rushed toward her like a small wave. Oliver held a new adventure book, his eyes bright. Sophie stood with her arms crossed, looking at Emily very seriously. "Miss Emily, did you become the main character in a sad story?" Emily bent down and looked at the little girl. "Not exactly," she said.
Maybe it is a story that began sadly, but the main character learned how to open the door herself. Sophie thought for a moment, then nodded, as if the answer was acceptable for now. That evening, Emily told Nathan about it. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, listening the way he had on the first day in the hospital. When she spoke about the library, the children, and the fact that the reading program still lacked funding, Nathan stayed silent longer than usual. "I want to create a fund," he said. Emily looked at him. "A fund to support people recovering after medical hardships and help them return to normal life. It could include counseling, transportation, meals, and community programs like your library. Not because I want to turn your work into my project, but because I have seen how a person can be left alone after leaving the hospital." Emily did not answer right away. In his words, she heard the memory of Claire, of herself, of hospital corridors he did not want anyone to walk through in silence. "What would the fund be called?" she asked. "Second shelf," Nathan said. "Because sometimes the most important part of a person's life is not on the first page." Emily looked at him, then at the lavender pot on the windowsill. "I like that name." Spring came late to Briarwood. Ice melted into small streams along the roadside. The maple trees along the street began to grow new buds. One afternoon in April, Emily came home from the pharmacy with 2 tests in her coat pocket. She had suspected it for several days, but she had not dared to hope too soon. After everything her body had been through, she understood that all good things needed to be received with care. When the result appeared, Emily sat in the bathroom for a very long time. Joy arrived with fear. Not loudly, not with absolute certainty, but it was real. She thought of the years of waiting, of the cream-colored baby blanket that had once been tucked inside an old drawer, of the doctor's words that she still had a chance, but would need careful monitoring. When Nathan came home, she simply handed him the result. He looked at it. Then he sat down beside her very slowly, as if his knees had suddenly lost their strength. There was joy in his eyes, but also a very deep fear. Emily understood. Before her, he had already lost too much. "I'm scared too," she said. Nathan held her, gently but firmly. "Then we will be scared together," he replied. The months that followed passed through regular checkups, simple dinners, mornings when Emily read by the window while Nathan worked with his office door slightly open. He went with her to her appointments, sat in the waiting room, made no noise, showed no need to control anything, simply remained present. Once, when they heard a very tiny heartbeat inside the softly lit room, Nathan turned his face away. Emily took his hand. "This time," she whispered, "we are not alone." Lily Reed was born in autumn, when the maple trees in Briarwood turned red and gold. Everything happened under the careful attention of the medical team. Nathan stayed beside Emily, quiet, his eyes never leaving her. When their daughter was placed into his arms, Nathan stood still. One tear fell, slow and silent. He did not wipe it away. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Your mother and I have waited for you for a very long time." The following spring, they bought a small house on the edge of Briarwood. It had a garden, young maple trees, and a patch of earth Emily set aside for lavender. One afternoon, she stood on the porch watching Nathan hold Lily. The baby laughed and reached up to touch her father's nose. Nathan laughed too, a sound so real that Emily felt her eyes sting. She remembered the morning on the bus, the small bag, the note on the kitchen table, the fear before the hospital. Back then, she had thought she was walking toward an ending. But some lives only begin again when we dare to walk through the place we once feared most. Emily's story is not a story about revenge. It is a story about a woman learning to listen to herself again after years of being overlooked. She did not become strong in one single moment.
She became strong through small choices, telling the truth about her fear, keeping the proof, seeking the right support, allowing herself to be cared for.
and moving forward with a clear mind. Sometimes a new beginning does not arrive through something grand. It may begin in a quiet hospital room, with a warm bowl of soup, with a hand offered at the right time, or with one simple sentence that reminds us we still have the right to choose our own life. If this story touched you, leave a comment. She deserves to be happy. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to keep following more emotional, humane, and inspiring stories in the next videos.